Iran issues major warning for other nations. Is this Bible prophecy? On March 18, 2026, Iran issued a warning, not to one country. You will be shocked when you find 4 facts about this. Number 1. The warning itself. Let me reconstruct the moment. Because the speed and the specificity of what Iran did on March 18th is what makes this event different from every previous escalation in the region. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran's most powerful military branch, the force that operates independently of the conventional military, the institution that controls Iran's ballistic missile program, its proxy networks, and its strategic doctrine, issued a public statement through state media and semi-official outlets, including Tasnim and Mehr News Agency. The statement was not ambiguous. It was not couched in diplomatic language. It was an evacuation order combined with a strike warning. The statement identified specific facilities by name. It declared those facilities direct and legitimate targets. It stated that strikes would come in the coming hours, and it told civilians in the vicinity to evacuate immediately, without delay, and move to a safe distance. This was not the kind of vague threat that Iran has issued dozens of times over the past 4 decades. The general rhetoric about destroying Israel, about punishing America, about the doom of the great Satan. This was operationally specific. Named targets, named countries, named facilities, and a timeline measured in hours, not abstract future tense. And the trigger for this warning was itself an escalation that crossed a line Iran had signaled for years would be unacceptable. Israel had struck the South Pars gas field, the largest natural gas field on Earth, located in the Persian Gulf, shared between Iran and Qatar. The strike hit Iran's side of the field, but the message was received across the Gulf, because any attack on shared infrastructure in those waters threatens every nation that depends on that energy. Iran's response was not defensive, it was expansive. It didn't just threaten to retaliate against Israel or the United States. It threatened to strike the energy infrastructure of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, nations that Iran accused of supporting, hosting, and enabling the American and Israeli military campaign. The war had jumped the fence, and the entire Gulf was now inside the battlefield. Number 2, the targets named. Now, let me show you what Iran was threatening to destroy, because the facilities named in the warning are not military bases. They are not weapons depots. They are the beating heart of the global energy system. Saudi Arabia, the Samref refinery in Yanbu, one of the largest export refineries in the kingdom, jointly operated by Saudi Aramco and ExxonMobil. The Jubail petrochemical complex, one of the largest industrial complexes in the world, producing chemicals, plastics, and refined products that feed global manufacturing supply chains. Qatar, the Ras Laffan refinery, and the Mesaieed petrochemical complex. Ras Laffan is the single most important LNG production facility on Earth. Qatar is the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas, and Ras Laffan is where the majority of that gas is processed, liquefied, and loaded onto tankers for shipment to Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Damage to Ras Laffan doesn't just affect Qatar. It sends shockwaves through the energy markets of every nation that imports LNG, including European nations that shifted away from Russian gas and are now dependent on Qatari supply. The United Arab Emirates, the Al Hosn gas field, one of the largest sour gas developments in the world, operated by ADNOC and critical to the UAE's domestic energy supply and its export capacity. These are not symbolic targets. These are the physical infrastructure that keeps the global economy functioning. Oil refineries that process millions of barrels per day, LNG facilities that supply heating fuel to hundreds of millions of people, petrochemical complexes that produce the raw materials for everything from medicine to packaging to construction materials. Hit these targets, and you don't just damage a country, you damage the world. And Iran was not bluffing. Within hours of the warning, missile and drone strikes hit Qatari infrastructure, including damage reported at Ras Laffan itself, fires, partial evacuations, and an immediate surge in global oil and gas prices. Brent crude spiking over 6% in a single trading session. Number 3, why energy was targeted. Now here's the strategic logic behind Iran's decision. Because this was not random, this was calculated. And the calculation reveals a strategy that is far more sophisticated than most people understand. Iran's conventional military has been devastated by Operation Epic Fury. Its air defenses are suppressed. Its navy is functionally destroyed. Over 30 vessels sunk or disabled. Its ballistic missile launch capability has been reduced by an estimated 86%. Its supreme leader is dead. Its command structure has been decapitated. By every conventional military metric, Iran is losing this war. But Iran is not fighting a conventional war. It is fighting an economic war. And in an economic war, the targets are not aircraft carriers and fighter jets. The targets are the systems that sustain your enemy's power. The oil that funds their allies. The gas that heats their partners' cities. The shipping lanes that carry their commerce. And the financial flows that prop up their economy. Energy is power, not metaphorically, literally. The Gulf states sell oil and gas. The revenue from those sales funds their governments, their militaries, and their investments in American markets. If Iran can shut down Gulf energy production, even temporarily, even partially, the economic cascade is immediate. Oil prices spike globally. Inflation surges in every importing nation. Stock markets drop. Consumer confidence collapses. And the petrodollar recycling system that funnels Gulf wealth into American financial markets begins to stall. This is not just war. This is pressure on the global system itself. And Iran has calculated, correctly or not, that the economic pain inflicted on America's allies will eventually force a political reckoning. Either the Gulf states demand that America end the war, or the economic damage becomes so severe that America's own financial system buckles under the pressure. And there's a detail in this strategy that connects to something we'll examine later through the lens of Scripture. Because the Bible doesn't describe oil markets, it doesn't mention LNG terminals or petrochemical complexes, but it does describe a world where global systems are shaken, where economic structures collapse, and where the disruption of commerce becomes a weapon used in the final conflicts of the age. And what Iran is doing right now, weaponizing energy, targeting economic infrastructure, attacking the system rather than the army, is exactly the kind of warfare that produces the conditions the prophets described. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, you need to see what happened to the most important waterway on Earth. Number 4. The trigger event. The event that triggered Iran's warning was itself an escalation that crossed a threshold most analysts believed would remain untouched. The South Pars gas field. South Pars is not an ordinary gas field. It is the largest natural gas field in the world, shared between Iran and Qatar, sitting beneath the waters of the Persian Gulf. Iran's portion is called South Pars. Qatar's portion is called the North Dome. Together, they contain an estimated 1,800 trillion cubic feet of natural gas and 50 billion barrels of natural gas condensates. To put that in perspective, this single field holds roughly 8% of the world's total proven natural gas reserves. When Israeli strikes hit Iran's portion of South Pars, the calculation for Iran changed instantly. This was not a strike on a military base. This was a strike on the economic lifeblood of the nation, the resource that funds whatever remains of the government, that powers whatever remains of the domestic economy, and that represents Iran's only bargaining chip for post-war reconstruction. But the strike also threatened Qatar's portion. The field is shared. The geology doesn't respect national borders. And Qatar, which depends on the North Dome for the vast majority of its LNG exports, found itself in the crossfire of a war it did not start and did not want. Reports indicate Qatar was not happy, which is diplomatic language for furious. When critical infrastructure of this magnitude is hit, escalation becomes almost inevitable. Because the strike didn't just damage Iran, it endangered the economic foundation of a nation that had been trying to remain neutral. And Iran's response, threatening to strike the energy infrastructure of every Gulf state it accuses of enabling the American campaign, was a message aimed not just at Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but at the entire region. If our energy is targeted, no one's energy is safe. Number 5. The Strait of Hormuz crisis. Now let me show you the choke point that could determine the outcome of this entire conflict. Because the Strait of Hormuz is not just a waterway, it is the single most strategically important corridor on Earth, and Iran is threatening to close it permanently. Approximately 20% of the world's oil supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz every day, roughly 21 million barrels. Tankers from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, and Qatar must navigate this narrow passage to reach global markets. The strait is only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. The shipping lanes are even tighter, roughly 2 miles in each direction. And Iran controls the northern shore. Its forces are positioned along approximately 150 miles of coastline directly on the strait. The IRGC Navy operates fast attack boats, mini-submarines, and mine-laying vessels from ports on the strait. Anti-ship missile batteries line the coast, and Iran has already demonstrated its willingness to attack commercial shipping, with at least 21 confirmed incidents since the war began. The Speaker of Iran's parliament declared publicly that the Strait of Hormuz won't return to its pre-war status. That is not a temporary threat. That is a statement of intent to permanently alter the terms under which global shipping passes through the most critical energy corridor on Earth. And the impact is already visible. Shipping traffic through the strait has dropped by as much as 97% in some reports. Insurance companies are refusing coverage for vessels transiting the Gulf. Tanker companies are rerouting, and global energy markets are in chaos. Prices spiking, supply chains disrupted, and nations that depend on Gulf energy scrambling for alternatives that don't exist in sufficient volume. CENTCOM responded with its own warning, demanding Iran keep the strait open for international shipping. U.S. forces dropped 5,000-pound GBU-72 bunker-buster bombs on hardened Iranian missile sites along the coastline near the strait. These are weapons specifically designed to penetrate deeply buried and reinforced targets. And the sites they struck housed anti-ship missiles that posed direct threats to commercial vessels. But destroying missile sites doesn't solve the problem if Iran can remine the strait, deploy fast boats from hidden positions, or simply maintain the credible threat that keeps shipping companies and insurers from allowing their vessels to transit. The threat doesn't need to be active every day. It just needs to be credible. And right now, it is. Number 6. U.S. military response. Now, let me show you what the United States is doing in response. Because the military buildup in the region is escalating by the day. The USS Tripoli, an amphibious assault ship carrying over 2,000 Marines from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, was observed transiting the Malacca Strait on March 18th, heading toward the northern Arabian Sea. The ship carries F-35B Lightning II stealth fighters, MV-22 Osprey tiltrotor aircraft, CH-53 Super Stallion heavy-lift helicopters, and AH-1Z Viper helicopter gunships. It is a floating invasion force, designed for amphibious operations, ground assault, and power projection ashore. This is the ground force option. If the Commander-in-Chief orders forces into Iran or onto Karg Island, Iran's primary oil export terminal in the northern Persian Gulf, the Marines on the Tripoli are the leading edge of that operation. The ship joins existing carrier strike groups already in theater, including the USS Abraham Lincoln. CENTCOM has also conducted large-scale precision strikes on Karg Island itself, destroying over 90 military targets, including missile bunkers and naval installations, while so far sparing the core oil export facilities. That restraint is deliberate and temporary. President Trump has stated publicly that if Qatar's facilities are struck again, the response would include massively blowing up South Pars. That is a threat to destroy the single largest natural gas field on Earth, an act that would reshape global energy markets for a generation. The escalation ladder is being climbed rung by rung, and each rung brings the conflict closer to the kind of systemic confrontation that changes the world order. Now, this is the development that separates this conflict from every previous Middle Eastern crisis. Because the war is no longer contained to Iran, it has spread across the Gulf, and the nations being hit are not combatants. They are bystanders caught in the crossfire. The UAE has borne the heaviest burden. Since the war began on February 28th, Iran has launched over 314 ballistic missiles, 1,672 drones, and 15 cruise missiles at the Emirates. The UAE's defense systems have achieved interception rates of approximately 95%. A remarkable feat of engineering and coordination. But 95% is not 100%. And the 5% that gets through has struck civilian areas in Dubai, residential buildings in Creek Harbor, the financial district around DIFC, and approaches to Dubai International Airport. At least 8 people have been killed, over 150 injured, and the attacks continue daily. Iran has launched more warheads at the UAE than at any other country in the conflict, including Israel. That fact alone tells you where Iran believes the pressure point is. The UAE is a tourism economy, a financial hub, a global logistics center. It depends on the perception of safety and stability. Every missile that gets through, every video of smoke rising from a Dubai skyscraper erodes that perception. Investors reconsider. Tourists cancel. Businesses relocate. And the economic damage compounds far beyond the physical destruction. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Kuwait have also been targeted, with missile and drone strikes hitting military installations and, increasingly, civilian-adjacent infrastructure. The Arab League has formally condemned Iran's attacks and demanded the Strait of Hormuz be reopened. But condemnation without military enforcement is just words. And the Gulf states, whose militaries are significant, but designed for regional defense rather than sustained conflict with a nation of 80 million people, are looking to the United States for the response they cannot provide themselves. The conflict is no longer one country against another. It is a regional war with global consequences. And the nations at the center of it are the nations that supply the energy the world runs on. Iran cannot match American technology, but it can outlast American ammunition. The battlefield is shifting from dominance to endurance, and endurance favors the side that fights cheaper and longer. This is not just another Middle East crisis. This is a system-level confrontation, the kind that doesn't just raise prices for a few weeks and then return to normal, the kind that restructures how the global economy works, and the kind that, for millions of believers watching from every continent, raises a question that goes deeper than economics. Now, let me tell you why this escalation stands apart from every previous tension in the Gulf region. Because Iran has threatened the Strait before. Iran has clashed with Gulf neighbors before. Iran has launched missiles and drones before. But this moment is different, and the difference is structural, not just tactical. First, the targets are civilian economic infrastructure, not military installations. Iran is not trying to sink a warship. It is trying to destroy the economic foundation of entire nations. That is a different category of warfare. Second, the threats are directed at multiple nations simultaneously. This is not Iran versus Israel. This is not Iran versus the United States. This is Iran versus the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, all within range, all within the threat envelope, all watching their most critical infrastructure being targeted. Third, the global impact is immediate and inescapable. Previous Gulf tensions caused temporary price spikes. This crisis is causing structural disruption. Shipping halted, supply chains broken, energy markets restructured, investment flows redirected. The damage compounds daily. And fourth, the scale of Iranian retaliation exceeds anything previously seen. Over 2,000 warheads launched in 3 weeks. More missiles at the UAE than at Israel. Daily attack waves that test the limits of even the most advanced defense systems. This is sustained, industrial-scale warfare. Not a one-off retaliatory strike followed by diplomatic silence. This isn't just another Middle East crisis. It's a system-level confrontation. And for believers who study Scripture, the shaking of global systems, the disruption of economies, the targeting of energy infrastructure, the realignment of alliances, and the centrality of the Persian Gulf raises questions that go beyond geopolitics. The prophecy question begins. When events like this unfold, when the ancient land of Persia is at the center of a conflict that touches every economy on Earth, when the energy systems that sustain global civilization are under direct attack, when alliances shift and nations that have been stable for decades suddenly face existential threats, many believers begin asking a deeper question. Is this just geopolitics? Or is this something the Bible warned about long ago? And I need to set the guardrails before we go further. No date setting, only examining whether the patterns described in Scripture align with what we're watching unfold. Scripture over headlines, patterns over predictions. Always. With those guardrails in place, let me show you why the nation at the center of this crisis is the same nation that 2 Old Testament prophets addressed by name. Turn to Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 5. Because in the middle of the most detailed geopolitical prophecy in the Old Testament, a prophecy that describes a specific coalition of nations invading Israel in the latter days, the prophet names a nation that you now know very well: Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Persia, the ancient, undisputed, universally recognized name for modern Iran. Few modern nations are named so clearly in prophecy. The Bible doesn't name America. It doesn't name China by a modern identifier. It doesn't name the European Union, but it names Persia, the exact nation that is right now waging an economic war against the Gulf, threatening the world's energy supply, and sitting at the center of the largest military confrontation in the Middle East since the Iraq War. That convergence between an ancient prophetic text and a modern geopolitical crisis is not something I can explain away, and it's not something I'm willing to ignore. Scene 13. The Coalition of Nations. Ezekiel 38 describes not a single enemy, but an alliance. A coalition led by Gog, from the land of Magog, widely associated with Russia, allied with Persia, Iran, Meshech and Tubal, Turkey, Cush, Sudan and the Horn of Africa, Put, Libya and North Africa, and Gomer and Togarmah, also associated with Turkey and surrounding regions. Every one of those alliance relationships exists in the real world right now. Russia and Iran have a deepening military partnership. Turkey has been drifting from NATO toward closer ties with Moscow. Iran funds proxy forces across the Middle East. The coalition framework Ezekiel described is not hypothetical. It is operational. But, and this is the critical distinction, the coalition has not marched against Israel. The invasion described in Ezekiel 38 has not occurred. The nations are positioned in the right alliances, but they have not acted in the right configuration. What we are watching is alignment, not fulfillment. The pieces are on the board. The game has not yet begun. Now there's a second prophetic text that connects even more directly to what is happening to Iran right now. He describes what happens to Iran, its military power, its people, its rulers, and its spiritual future. And the specificity of what he wrote, roughly 2,600 years ago, reads like a dispatch from this week's intelligence briefings. Let me give you the context first. The prophet Jeremiah ministered in Jerusalem during the final decades before the Babylonian exile, one of the darkest periods in Israel's history. He watched the kingdom of Judah disintegrate morally, spiritually, and politically. He warned of coming judgment. He was ignored, imprisoned, thrown into a cistern, and accused of treason. And in the midst of that personal suffering, God gave him prophetic oracles, not just about Israel, but about the surrounding nations. Chapters 46 through 51 of Jeremiah contain prophecies against Egypt, Philistia, Moab, Ammon, Edom, Damascus, Kedar, Hazor, and Babylon. And tucked among them, in chapter 49, verses 34 through 39, is a brief but devastating oracle against Elam. Now, Elam is not the same as Persia in the broadest sense, and that distinction matters. Persia refers to the broader civilization and empire centered in what is now Iran. Elam refers to a specific ancient region in southwestern Iran, the area around modern-day Khuzestan province, extending into the Bushehr and Fars provinces. This is not a different country, it is a specific region within Iran, and the geographic precision matters enormously, because the Bushehr province is where Iran's only operational nuclear power plant is located, and the Khuzestan province is where the majority of Iran's oil production is concentrated. The region Jeremiah targets is the exact region where Iran's most strategically significant assets sit today. That geographic alignment between an ancient prophetic oracle and the modern location of Iran's most critical infrastructure is a detail most people skip past. But it's a detail that should make you pay very close attention to what Jeremiah says next. Let me walk through the prophecy verse by verse, because each clause has a modern dimension that is impossible to ignore, and each one requires honest assessment of what aligns and what remains unfulfilled. Jeremiah 49:35. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the chief of their might. The bow. In the ancient world, Elamite archers were legendary, feared across the entire Near East for their range, their accuracy, and their devastating effectiveness on the battlefield. The bow was not a secondary weapon for Elam. It was the defining military capability, the chief of their might, the weapon that made Elam a power to be reckoned with in the ancient world. Now ask yourself, what is the bow of modern Iran? What is the chief of their might, the primary military capability that makes Iran a regional power, that allows it to threaten nations thousands of miles away, that gives it the ability to project force beyond its borders? Its ballistic missile program, its drone arsenal, its air defense systems, its nuclear infrastructure. These are the modern equivalents of the ancient bow, the weapons that define Iran's military identity and give the regime its strategic deterrence. And as of March 2026, that bow is being systematically broken. Operation Epic Fury has struck ballistic missile production facilities, underground storage sites, and mobile launchers across Iranian territory. B-2 stealth bombers have dropped GBU-28 bunker-buster munitions on deeply buried sites that Iran built inside mountains specifically to survive aerial bombardment. Iran's ballistic missile launch capability has been reduced by an estimated 86%. Its navy, over 30 vessels, has been sunk or disabled. Its integrated air defense network has been suppressed. The bow is being broken. But here's where the honest assessment must intervene. The verse says, I will break. The subject is God. Not the United States, not Israel, not CENTCOM, God. The prophecy describes a divine action, a breaking so total, so decisive, and so unmistakably from the hand of God that it cannot be attributed solely to human military strategy. What we are seeing right now is devastating. But is it the kind of irrevocable supernatural breaking that Jeremiah describes? Or is it a military campaign that, while effective, could still leave Iran with residual capability, with the ability to rebuild, to reconstitute, to acquire new weapons from Russia or China or North Korea? The honest answer, we don't know yet. The breaking is real. The question is whether it's total. And totality is what the prophecy demands. Jeremiah 49:36. And upon Elam will I bring the four winds from the four quarters of heaven, and will scatter them toward all those winds. And there shall be no nation whither the outcasts of Elam shall not come. Four winds, four quarters of heaven, scattered to every nation on earth. This is not a localized displacement. This is a global diaspora, so comprehensive that the outcasts of Elam appear in every nation under heaven. And the scattering of Iran's people has already begun. It began in 1979 when the Islamic Revolution overthrew the Shah, installed Ayatollah Khomeini's theocratic regime, and sent millions of Iranians fleeing to the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, and dozens of other nations. The Iranian diaspora today numbers between 4 and 6 million people, with major communities in Los Angeles, London, Toronto, Sydney, Berlin, Dubai, and cities across every continent. But the scattering has not been a single event. It has come in waves. After the revolution, during the Iran-Iraq War, after the 2009 Green Movement protests, after the 2019 and 2022 uprisings, and now, in March 2026, with the supreme leader dead, the military shattered, the economy collapsing, and the entire infrastructure of the state under sustained bombardment. The conditions for the largest wave of Iranian displacement in history are forming.